Wild Karen screws her car up. I've got a story for you. A rather short one originally, but I'm going to stretch it out with all the extra details that make it one of those moments you can't forget. It involves downtown Denver, a fancy neighborhood called Cherry Creek, and a lady I can only describe as a wild Karen. You know the type. Entitled, impatient, and convinced the whole world should bow down to her. But sometimes karma shows up and smacks that entitlement right across the face, leaving everyone else to watch the aftermath with a smug little grin. Now, allow me to set the stage properly. Cherry Creek, for those who aren't from Colorado, is one of Denver's posh areas. It's known for its upscale shopping center, high-end boutiques, trendy restaurants, and pricey fitness studios. You'll often see luxury cars cruising down the street. Porsches, Teslas, Range Rovers, and of course the occasional BMW SUV. People in Cherry Creek generally have a reputation for being, well, a bit hoity-toity. Not all of them, mind you, but enough so that if you're not prepared, you'll run into a handful of folks who act like the world is their personal valet. I was driving around there on a relatively busy day. Actually, busy might be an understatement because in Denver proper, especially near downtown, traffic can get chaotic. You've got one-way streets, narrow alleys, and people who treat the roads like their personal racetrack. On top of that, many streets converge at odd angles, so if you don't know the area, it can be confusing. I've lived here long enough to navigate reasonably well, but that doesn't mean I'm immune to the occasional frustration of weaving in and out of downtown lanes. That day, I was just trying to be patient and get from point A to point B without any drama. Alas, that was not in the cards, as you'll soon see. The eventful moment occurred in a small one-way alley that connects to a main street. Picture me idling at the mouth of this alley, engine purring. My turn signal on, waiting to merge left onto the main road. Because it's downtown, cars were zooming by, and I had to be mindful of traffic coming from both sides. Yes, this was a one-way alley, but it fed into a road that had multiple lanes. I was trying to make a left turn, which meant crossing one lane of potential oncoming traffic, and then merging into the left lane once it cleared. In many parts of Denver, especially near Cherry Creek, traffic never fully clears. You just wait for your window and hope to accelerate at the right moment so you don't get honked at, or worse, T-boned. So there I was, inching forward, checking my mirrors, checking my blind spots, scanning the oncoming traffic. The day was bright, maybe late afternoon or early evening, and the sun was shining in such a way that it created a few extra glares on windshields. Visibility wasn't perfect, but I could still see well enough. I had to be cautious, though. Nobody likes a car accident, and dealing with insurance companies is the ultimate headache. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a black BMW SUV. This thing was shiny, black paint glistening. Probably brand new, or at least a newer model. The driver had a manic energy, honking at me with an unmistakable impatience, as if I were committing some grave personal offense by merely existing in that alley. Immediately, I noted a few things. The main street had 3 lanes, 2 moving lanes, and 1 turn lane in the middle. The BMW driver was positioned in the middle turn lane. She was making wild hand gestures, the kind you'd expect in a cartoon where the character is so mad. Steam comes out of their ears. She was repeatedly honking with short, angry taps, honk, 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 like a woodpecker going to town on a tree. She wanted me to hurry up and get out of her way so she could turn into the alley I was occupying. Let's call her Karen, for brevity's sake, and because the name fits her entitled attitude perfectly. Karen seemed utterly convinced that the solution to her problem was for me to leap into oncoming traffic immediately, just so she could get into the alley faster. Now, let's consider this from a traffic safety standpoint. To make my left turn out of the alley, I had to cross at least 1 lane of oncoming traffic, plus ensure no cars were coming from my left side. It's downtown, so there's a steady flow of vehicles, and I can't just step on the gas pedal blindly. That's how accidents happen. I needed to wait for a decent gap, something that Karen, in her infinite impatience, clearly had no tolerance for. In normal circumstances, if someone honks at me, I might glance around to see if there's an actual emergency. Like, maybe I'm about to back into a pedestrian, or there's an ambulance I hadn't noticed. If I see no genuine reason, I'll usually ignore it. But Karen wouldn't let up. She kept blaring her horn as if each honk would magically part the sea of cars, and allow me to vanish. She also gave me the universal "move it along, you idiot" Handgestur, which involves jabbing your hand forward while your other hand sometimes flails around for emphasis. At that point, I was more amused than irritated. Sometimes you encounter these hotheads, and you can only shake your head. But then, things took a turn for the truly comedic. Karen decided she couldn't wait anymore. She cut off the traffic in the middle lane, forcing a couple of cars to either brake or swerve slightly. This was her bold move to turn into the one-way alley, except she was entering it in the wrong direction. You see, that alley was a one-way, and I was at the exit side. She was forcibly turning into the exit, effectively going against the designated flow. I watched in astonishment as her black BMW lurched forward. She angled her SUV to the right, presumably hoping I'd reverse or vanish into thin air. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't back up because there might be another car behind me in the alley, and I certainly couldn't dart into traffic to my left because it still wasn't clear. Meanwhile, a Tacoma truck was pulling up alongside me, also waiting, or perhaps just in the alley. It was one of those rugged off-road types, sporting a heavy-duty metal bumper. The guy driving it, or maybe it was a gal, I never actually saw who, seemed unimpressed by Karen's antics and just idled there, minding their own business. Karen, in her mad rush to claim territory in the alley, attempted to squeeze her BMW between my car and the Tacoma. This was a tight squeeze even under calm circumstances, but her sense of personal space appeared to be grossly distorted. The alley wasn't wide enough for her maneuver, let alone wide enough for her to do it swiftly without scraping something. And oh, did she scrape something? I heard the shriek of metal against metal, that cringeworthy sound that instantly makes any car enthusiast wince. Her entire right side of the SUV collided with the Tacoma's sturdy bumper, leaving a trail of scratches and dents along her gleaming black paint job. If you've ever witnessed a slow-motion fender bender, you know how surreal it can look. The sound is half squeal, half crunch, and if you're not the unfortunate driver involved, it's almost comedic in a schadenfreude kind of way. Karen's BMW kept moving, as though momentum alone might help her break free of the humiliating scrape. Her tires squealed slightly, and there was a moment when her face, twisted in anger, shifted to a mask of horror. I think the realization that she was actively demolishing her own luxury SUV sank in kind. But she'd committed to the turn, and it was too late to undo the mistake. The best she could do was keep going and hope the damage wasn't as bad as it sounded. Spoiler alert, it was. From my vantage point, the entire side of her black BMW was now streaked with silver lines and visible dents. So the Tacoma, with its rugged, full-metal off-road bumper, seemed unscathed, which I confirmed later when I got out to check. The driver of that truck was either extremely calm or just used to these kinds of city shenanigans. While Karen must have felt a mixture of embarrassment and fury, the truck stood there like a seasoned bull that had just been lightly bumped by a clueless matador. Meanwhile, I was still stuck, waiting for the traffic on the left to clear. Ironically, Karen's reckless attempt to hurry me had only caused a delay for everyone. Now the alley was partially blocked, and she had to realign her SUV to get fully into it. Fortunately, or unfortunately for her, I guess, she managed to wedge her car in such a way that I could eventually maneuver out. You might wonder, what did Karen do next? Well, she started blasting her horn again, but this time it was more of a quick, panicked beep rather than the aggressive, extended honks from before. She rolled down her window, looked like she was about to shout something, but her face had that flushed, humiliated look. Maybe she realized that she was responsible for the accident, so she had no ground to stand on if she wanted to blame me or the Tacoma driver. The comedic cherry on top was that her presumably urgent need to get into that alley accomplished nothing but damaging her own car. She was probably red in the face, cursing herself out, but that didn't change the fact that she had new, expensive bodywork to schedule. In a moment of genuine concern, I stayed put for a little longer once I finally got a break in traffic, just to check if the Tacoma had any damage. I felt some responsibility to see if the truck owner needed a witness or anything. We were in a public space, but it was also an alley, so it wasn't heavily trafficked by pedestrians. If the truck driver came out later, they might want to know what happened or ask if anybody saw. Damage on the Tacoma turned out to be practically non-existent, at least from what I could see. The big off-road bumper probably saved it from any real harm. Even the paint on it looked undisturbed. Maybe a tiny scuff if you got super close, but certainly nothing major. Meanwhile, Karen's SUV was a different story. The side door was visibly dented, and streaks of paint peeled off in long lines. I could also see the misshapen contour running along the passenger side, suggesting a costly repair. Part of me wanted to pity her. Luxury cars come with a hefty price tag, and repairs for them are notoriously expensive, but pity wasn't the dominant feeling in that moment. Instead, I was thoroughly entertained by the poetic justice of it all. She'd rushed, honked, and demanded her way through traffic, only to sabotage herself with a self-inflicted scrape. Eventually, I pulled out onto the main street. Traffic had opened up enough for me to make my left turn safely. As I drove off, I couldn't help replaying the scene in my head, feeling a bit of a grin on my face. The phrase, "You reap what you sow," rang like a mantra in my mind. Had she just waited a little longer or approached the alley from the correct direction, she could have saved herself a world of trouble and a hefty repair bill. But the cost of entitlement, apparently, is steep. I've lived in Denver a good while now, and I've seen my share of Karen moments, like the time someone in a fancy sedan tried to park in a no-parking zone, only to get promptly towed, or the time a driver tailgated a city bus, which never ends well, and ended up with a smashed front bumper. Cherry Creek especially is rife with these stories, given the concentration of high-end vehicles and the type of personalities often associated with them. Of course, not everyone in Cherry Creek is like that. There are plenty of kind, generous souls, but the stereotype persists for a reason. Some people's sense of entitlement escalates behind the wheel of a luxury car. The comedic aspect of a wild Karen in traffic is heightened by how brazenly these individuals ignore basic road rules, like, say, not driving into an alley from the wrong direction. A lot of folks might try to excuse themselves by claiming they were unfamiliar with the area, but Karen's frantic hand gestures and the way she was honking made it clear she thought I was the problem for not jetting out into traffic. The height of entitlement, in my opinion, is blaming others for your own impatience. I've told this story to a few friends, and they all get a big laugh out of the side scrape moment. Typically, the retelling goes something like, "She got instant karma." Some friends ask if I confronted her, but I didn't see the point. Confronting her would likely lead to an argument, or she'd lash out at me as though I'd caused her to steer into the Tacoma. It's not like I forced her to drive headfirst into that bumper. She made that choice all on her own. It's also worth noting that in Denver, many alleys are quite narrow and are designated as one-way for a reason, to prevent exactly these types of collisions. You can't have vehicles entering from both ends when the space is too tight. But Karen either didn't notice the signs or willfully chose to ignore them because she felt her time was more valuable than everyone else. Well, that's how you end up with a damaged BMW. There's a lesson in this tale too, for all drivers, myself included. It's a reminder that sometimes you just have to wait. Maybe you're in a hurry, or maybe you just hate standing still. But jumping the gun can lead to bigger problems than a brief delay. If Karen had waited literally 30 more seconds for me to merge, she could have turned into the alley with no obstruction. If she'd taken another route or approached from a different angle, she could have avoided any scuffle. Instead, she made a momentary decision that caused permanent damage to her vehicle. And let's not forget how close I came to being a casualty of her impatience. If she'd hit me instead of the truck, it could have left me with a messed-up car, insurance headaches, and potential injuries. The Tacoma's bumper effectively shielded me from becoming collateral damage. For that, I'm grateful. It's not a comfortable feeling to think that you might have been caught up in someone else's reckless driving. After I finally drove away, I spent the rest of the day thinking about how that little moment of chaos had brightened my mood. That might sound twisted, finding joy in someone else's misfortune, but it's not so much her misfortune as it was her arrogance and disregard for others finally catching up with her. If she had been a polite, cautious driver who accidentally scraped her car, I'd probably feel bad. But the fact she'd been rude, honking like a maniac, and gesturing for me to break traffic laws just made her comeuppance feel like a cosmic boomerang. She hurled negativity at me, and it swung right back at her in the form of a destroyed paint job. I suppose we can call that a teachable moment for all of us. Patience in traffic isn't just about adhering to the rules. It's also about keeping your stress levels down, preserving your vehicle, and showing respect to other drivers who have just as much right to be there as you do. The roads in Cherry Creek, and any major city really, are hectic enough without adding unchecked aggression to the mix. We all got places to go, and a little courtesy can go a long way. For those who aren't used to downtown Denver driving, I'd also advise paying close attention to signage. One-way alleys are marked, albeit not always in the most obvious way. If you find yourself uncertain, it's far better to circle the block than to force your way in the wrong direction. All it takes is one unsuspecting vehicle, or one off-road truck with a steel bumper, to show you exactly why that sign was there in the first place. Some folks might wonder if the Tacoma driver ever came out to assess the damage. From what I saw, the driver either wasn't in the truck at the time or wasn't particularly bothered by a slight bump. Sometimes, Especially if it's a high-clearance off-road rig, owners trust the protective gear to handle minor scuffs. If I were in their position, I'd at least want to double-check for scratches. But maybe they were busy or didn't notice. In any case, I stuck around for a minute to see if the driver appeared, ready to provide my contact information as a witness. Nobody showed, so I took a few photos of the aftermath, just in case someone needed proof later, and went on my way. That's another tip for city drivers. Documentation. If you see an accident involving a parked car, it can be helpful to snap a few pictures or scribble down details. You never know if your documentation might save someone a major headache down the road with insurance claims. Of course, you want to be safe. Don't jump into the middle of a heated confrontation. But if it's a clear case of Karen smashed into that bumper, you might do a good deed by giving the truck owner some evidence. In the end, I posted my story online. This was actually one of my first times sharing a Karen experience on social media, so I worried a bit about the etiquette of it all. But I figured, if anything deserves to be shared, it's a story about an over-the-top driver getting exactly what they dished out. People seemed to enjoy the post, especially the part where the BMW's entire side got scraped. Some called it instant karma. Others said they wished they'd been there to see it. A few folks felt sorry for the BMW, but most recognized that Karen had effectively done this to herself. That's the thing about the internet. Folks love to see a rude person put in their place. Reflecting on it, I still get a bit of satisfaction reliving the moment. Maybe there's a lesson in that too. It's okay to feel a small sense of relief when justice is served, even if it comes in the form of property damage. It's not that we wish harm or huge losses on people, but when someone's careless aggression backfires immediately, it's like watching a cautionary tale unfold in real time. We see the cause and effect so plainly. You drive like a maniac, you pay the price. I imagine Karen had to explain to her insurance company how she ended up scraping the entire side of her BMW in an alley going the wrong way. I wonder if she told the truth or tried to spin it. Regardless, that's not my problem. And if she ended up having to fix it out of pocket, maybe that taught her to show a bit more patience and common courtesy on the road. Or maybe not. Some people never learn, and they go on blaming everyone else for their mistakes. Who knows? Every time I pass by that particular alley now, I smile a little to myself. I half expect to see another Karen type trying some bold illegal maneuver. But usually it's just quiet, with a couple of cars lined up, patiently waiting to merge onto the main street. And that's how it should be, folks. Calm, orderly, and respectful of the rules. Because if you push your luck, you might end up like that wild Karen, denting up your fancy ride and leaving everyone around you shaking their heads. So that's the story. What started as a quick anecdote about a reckless BMW driver has become a cautionary tale about entitlement, traffic rules, and the odd satisfaction that can come from seeing karma in action. I do love a good gotcha moment, especially when I'm not the one footing the repair bill. If you've ever been honked at by someone who thinks the world revolves around them, or if you've encountered a driver so impatient they disregard the simplest safety protocols, you know the sweet feeling of seeing them immediately reap what they've sown. It's like a mini justice system at work, right there on the street. Thanks for bearing with me through this extended version of the story. At first, it was just a short, amusing incident, but there's so much that can be unpacked about human behavior, city driving, and the phenomenon we call Karens. Whether this was your first exposure to one of these traffic tales, or you're a veteran of chaotic city roads, I hope it at least gave you a chuckle, or a moment of validation. Sometimes, the universe really does even the score. And if you're reading this, Karen, though I doubt you'd remember me, next time maybe just wait a minute and let the other driver pass. Your precious SUV will thank you, and everyone else won't have to deal with the aftermath of your impatient meltdown. Consider that, if you will, a piece of friendly advice from someone who saw the entire fiasco and ended up with a front row seat to your epic fail. Drive safe, everyone. And remember, one moment of impatience can cause a whole lot of grief. If you ever find yourself stuck behind someone who can't immediately move, consider that they might be waiting for a real reason, like a gap in traffic or a pedestrian crossing. You never know. And before you flip out with honking and gestures, ask yourself, is it really worth risking my own fender for the sake of saving a few extra seconds? If the answer is no, well, you're already smarter than that wild Karen.